The beacon was never meant to reach anyone but our own empire. I know that now the way I know the color of the chapel walls, the weight of the ceremonial oil jar, the sound the children make when they recite the morning wards. I have been chaplain to the Orvith colony for 11 years. I have held the hands of the dying. I have blessed the seedbeds. I have lit the remembrance fires on the anniversary of the crossing. I know our colony the way you know a house you have lived in so long you stop, seeing its cracks. I did not know what the colony beacon was wired to. That is my failing, or it was. I have made a kind of peace with it. The day the Valkyrie siege fleet arrived in our outer ring, we had 46 minutes before their forward screen would be in firing range of the settlement. Our militia had 3 patrol cutters and a converted grain hauler with 2 railguns welded to its cargo deck. I watched our garrison commander, a hard, quiet woman named Ferrith, run her assessments at the operations table and say nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Transmit." The colony beacon was a legacy installation, bolted to the outer hull of the communications annex sometime before my assignment here. It was built for colonial emergencies. It was supposed to pulse a compressed distress record to the Orvith Imperial Relay at Sector 1, our home empire, our people, the ones who were supposed to come for us. Ferrith pressed the trigger herself. I was watching from the chapel doorway because the operations annex shares a wall with us, and the noise the beacon made when it fired was not a noise I had ever heard before. A low, resonant crack, like ice giving way beneath something heavy. The children in the chapel looked up from their morning work. I told them it was nothing. I believed that. The beacon fired once. The compressed packet contained our coordinates, the composition of the Valkyrie fleet, current defensive capability, and a time-to-contact figure. Standard colonial protocol. The packet went up the line towards Sector 41. The Sector 41 relay had been decommissioned 8 months prior in the Imperial infrastructure consolidation. Nobody had updated the beacon's routing table. The packet reached the old relay node, found it dark, and then did what packets do when they find a relay dark. It looked for the nearest active forwarding node. The nearest active forwarding node was not ours. I learned all of this later, from the after-action briefing that Ferrith distributed to colony leadership. I read it 3 times. I still had to sit down when I finished. The packet had rerouted through a shared band junction maintained by Earth under the terms of something called the Orvith-Terran Mutual Assistance Compact, a document signed 7 decades ago during the early expansion period when both our peoples were laying comms infrastructure through the same transit corridor. The compact had one operational clause. Any emergency packet transiting the shared junction node would be treated as a formal quest under the mutual aid provision and forwarded to the nearest Terran response authority. We had not known the junction was there. We had not known the compact was still in force. We had not asked Earth for anything. Earth received the packet 22 minutes before the Valkyrie forward screen would reach firing range. I was in the chapel when the new contact signatures appeared on Ferrith's display. She came to the doorway, which she had never done before, and she looked at me with an expression I could not read, and she said, "There are 3 ships inbound. They are not ours. Transponders are Terran." I said, "Terran." She said, "2 warships, and something I do not have a classification for. They are moving fast." I did not know what to say to that. The children were watching us. I told them to continue their work. The Terran ships dropped from transit speed at the outer ring 11 minutes later. I was watching from the chapel's high window. We have 3. Narrow, set into the stone of the old building, and from the eastern one you can see a strip of sky above the settlement perimeter. I saw nothing of the ships themselves, only the light they made coming in, a hard, brief white that faded to nothing as they decelerated. The communication came through the operations annex. I heard Ferrith's voice and then a different voice, calm even, carrying a slight flatness in its phrasing, that I understand now is characteristic of Terran military personnel, conducting themselves in a professional capacity. The voice said they had received a mutual aid request under the Orvith-Terran Compact, and they were on station. Ferrith said, "We did not know we had sent a request to Earth," the voice said. "The routing record shows a valid emergency packet transiting the shared junction node. That constitutes a request under our shared compact. "We are on station," Ferrith said. "We have 3 patrol cutters," the voice said. "That is fine. We have 2. There was a pause, and then Ferrith said, "The Valkyrie forward screen will be in range in 9 minutes." The voice said, "We are aware. We have already made contact with the Valkyrie command element," Ferrith said. "You have what?" The voice said they had hailed the Valkyrie fleet on first arrival and transmitted the relevant compact citation, included Earth as a mutual defense guarantor for all colony signatories in the transit corridor. The voice said the Valkyrie had not responded. The voice said that was fine also. What happened next? I watched through the narrow eastern window of the chapel, which is not designed for watching naval engagements, and I saw almost nothing of tactical value. I saw light in the outer ring, hard and quick, in a pattern that did not repeat and did not last long. I heard the children asking questions. I answered none of them. The Valkyrie fleet withdrew 17 minutes. After the Terran ships arrived on station, Ferrith came to the chapel when it was over. She sat in the last pew, which she had also never done before, and she said nothing for a while. I sat beside her. The children had been moved to the lower hall by then, and it was quiet. She said, "They are asking permission to dock the 3rd ship," I said. "What is the 3rd ship?" she said. "They are calling it a support tender. It carries medical staff, engineering teams, months of emergency rations," I said. "We did not ask for those things." She said no. I said, "Did they send those things because they thought we would need them after a siege engagement?" she said. I asked. "They said the compact's mutual aid provision covers emergency resupply for any signatory colony that activates an emergency beacon. They said they brought the standard package." "I thought about that," I said. "What is in the standard package?" She read from her display. She read for a while. When she finished, I sat with it. Then I said, "They brought that for us. Because our packet went through the wrong node." She said, "Yes," I said, "and they are apologizing." She said, "The senior officer transmitted a note. He says they were 7 minutes beyond their target arrival window and regrets the delay. He says the transit deviation added time. He says he hopes the gap did not cause additional harm." I looked at the window. The strip of sky above the perimeter was ordinary again. Cloud and pale light, same as always. I am a chaplain. I have a theology of intervention, the same one all our chaplains are trained in. The belief that aid comes, when it is called for, from the direction it is needed, in the form that can be used. I have recited it at funerals. I have spoken it over seedbeds and in hospital wards and at the crossing anniversary, fires. I had never considered that it might be literally true, that a cry sent in one direction might curve, reroute through a dark node, find an active junction, and arrive at the door of something it was never aimed at, and that the something at that door might have a written obligation, a shared compact, a standard package, and the specific competence to do the work. I gave Ferrith permission to dock the 3rd ship. That evening, when the medical teams had set up in the community hall and the engineers had begun their structural assessments and the supply crates were being cataloged by colony volunteers, I walked out to the communications annex and looked at the beacon housing. The indicator light was dark. It had done its work. It had no idea what work it had done. I put my hand on the housing for a moment, the way I put my hand on the oil jar before a service. A habit. A gesture toward the thing that carried the weight. Then I went back to the chapel, lit the remembrance fires early, and sat with the children until it was time to eat. We had not aimed the beacon at Earth, had countersigned the compact anyway. Earth had sent 3 ships. I do not have a theological framework for that yet. I am working on it.